Each Sunday I have a non-biblical reading, spiritual reading, to help remind us that God hasn't stopped speaking, but speaks through many people in many ways. So today I'd like to read from Marcus Borg's book called Reading the Bible Again for the First Time. He's talking here about creation stories. Critical thinking leads to an understanding of why the details of Genesis are as they are, and also makes clear that their truth is not to be understood in literal, factual terms. Rather, their truth is expressed in the non-conceptual language of myth and metaphor. And no particular reading can exhaust their meanings. But I can hear the truth of their central claims. This, the universe and we, is not self-caused, but grounded in the sacred. This is utterly remarkable and wondrous, a mystery beyond words that evokes wonder, awe, and praise. We begin our lives in paradise, but we all experience expulsion into a world of exile, anxiety, self-preoccupation, bondage, and conflict. And yes, also a world of goodness and beauty. It is the creation of God. But it is a world in which something is awry. The rest of the Bible is to a large extent the story and stories of this state of affairs, the human predicament and its solution. Our lives east of Eden are marked by exile, and we need to return and reconnect. Would you pray with me? Holy One, as we tackle some of these ancient stories, may your Spirit breathe new perspectives and insights and wisdom into each of our hearts and minds. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your light and your insight. Amen. So let me begin this series by reminding us that the Bible is not a general theology book, nor is it a book of abstract ideas. The Bible was written by a specific group of people known interchangeably as the Israelites, the Hebrews, and the Jews. That's the answer to your first question. Specific stories written by them for their people in their context and their understanding of God in the midst of it. Renita Weems is an Old Testament professor working at Vanderbilt, and she said that when she has those first-year divinity students, the first thing she says to them in their Old Testament class is, please know that this is not a course about what God said. This is a course about what the ancient Hebrews said God said. Got that? There's a difference, and it's important that we understand that difference. I chose to do this series because there's so many of these Old Testament stories that we reference in our everyday language, in books and movies and cartoons. And I saw a TV show last week that talked about David and Goliath in brief, like mentioned, oh yeah, just like David and Goliath. Well, what if you don't know who David and Goliath were? And what if you don't know more about the story? Maybe we've heard the stories, but do we really know the stories? So this is our chance to kind of go in depth, put them in context, look at them critically, and try and draw a meaning or two out of it. Now, my disclaimer is that you can preach a multitude of sermons on any one of these texts with a multitude of messages. So you're getting mine today. But that doesn't mean that 20 other preachers couldn't preach it differently. So if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, write your grocery list and we're all good. So, can you think think of, other than Adam and Eve and David and Goliath, can you think of other Old Testament stories that you hear or see, things that are part of our secular language and imagery?
Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark. We're going to do that next week. What else?
The whale. Who's Jonah and the whale?
Jonah and the whale. What else? Abraham and Isaac. We're going to do that one too. I don't like that one, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do Jonah and the whale too. What else?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. Oh, so here's my other question that I was going to put on my quiz, Mike. How many children did Adam and Eve have?
5 million.
All of them.
All.
No, you're both wrong. Listen closer. No. No, actually, how many boys did they have? They had 3 boys. We'll get there. Okay. So, any other stories you can think of?
What's Samson and Delilah?
Samson and Delilah. Absolutely. What'd you say, Kathy?
Job.
Job. Anybody else? I'm sorry? Moses and the parting of the sea. Hear about that, absolutely. I'm going to touch on stories like Esther and Deborah. Do you know who Deborah was? Do you know that ancient Israel had a woman who was a judge? Right? Go figure. So we're going to touch on some of these stories so we understand them more deeply. I'll hit on 12 of them. But for today, we're going to do Adam and Eve, because what better place to start than, well, A, the beginning of Genesis, and B, if religion is going to set forth kind of a definitive set of documents, scripture, for their religion, why not think, but of course, let's start at the very beginning. Let's put the origin story there. What's interesting now is that Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are 2 completely separate creation stories. So there are 2 creation stories, both of which were written long after the actual coalescing of Israel as a people. So we have Abraham through Moses and the Exodus and getting to the Promised Land. That all happens ends about 1300 BCE, before the Common Era. That first Genesis story, the one where everything's created in 7 days, right? You all remember that one. It's very poetic, based probably on a Babylonian myth. Ends with creating human beings, and then God rests. That story was written about 500 BCE. So remember, we're going backwards, right? So it was written like 800 years later than the actual establishment of Israel as a people. The second Genesis story, which happens in Genesis 2 and 3 that you saw in our cool little skit, was written even earlier than that. So it was written about 900 BCE. So the Bible actually starts with the most recent story, and then moves to the next most recent story, and then goes on. So that's just kind of a throwaway comment, I guess. Side knowledge, things to crowd up your brain. So it's important to remember that, again, this is a story written by the people of Israel for their people. So while Julie throws away, you can they throw away these comments like, oh, Adam and Eve were like the beginning of everybody. 'Tis not true. They were only the beginning of the Israelites, because as soon as they leave the garden, Adam and Eve have 2 sons, Mike, who were Cain and Abel, and Cain marries a woman who is not his sister, by the way, thank goodness. But where'd she come from? There were all kinds of other people in the world at that point. And also interesting to note, so Cain kills Abel, right? But then they have another son to replace Abel, and his name is Seth. And so as we do these stories, you'll find, I may kind of go, oh yeah, did you know Noah was the great grandson of Seth, something like that. They all kind of trace their generations back. But there were 3 boys by Cain and Abel, and girls from somewhere else. So we have to know that this story is simply about the Israelites and how they understood the beginning of their special people. Putting ourselves back in that time frame, we understood that there were all kinds of gods and goddesses. Every culture, every tribe had their own god and or goddess. Right? And so this was the way for the Israelites to define themselves and their own specific creation origin story. So, Julie says Israel was like the Garden of Eden. I think what Marcus Borg would say is that this is kind of the story that says we are all in exile. And this is that the way not to get out of exile is to be in right relationship with God. So, couple of interesting things about this Adam and Eve story. First, humans have pride of place. In the first creation story, humans are created last. In this one, aside from having an earth to live on, they're created first. And it's a generic human being that's created. It's an earth creature. Adam, or Adam that we've translated into, Adam literally meant earth creature, which came from the clay of the earth, which in Hebrew was Adamah. So it's not much different from us saying humans come from humus. Understand, there were a lot of puns that the writers of Second Genesis, the Adam and Eve story, used. So a generic non-gendered being was created, and not gendered until split in half and created male and female. So the age-old subjugation of women by the church, because the King James Version said that God created Eve as a helpmeet. I don't even know what that means, but a helpmeet does not do justice to the original text. The original text comes closer to what our inclusive Bible says, which is that God creates a companion. Another commentary I read said that God created someone who was a sustainer alongside. It was a partnership. It wasn't one over the other. So we've taken and we've twisted some of these original stories to suit the purposes of the people in charge. So that's one interesting thing. Another thing to note is the trees that were created. The tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Not sure, scholars say, why exactly there were 2 trees, and we never really hear much about the tree of life, but in our inclusive Bible I really like what it says, which is that the tree of life is the tree of unity. It's the tree of interrelatedness. It's the tree that says you have a deep spiritual life with God when you understand that all things are one. And that's paradise, to live in non-duality, to live where you recognize everything's sacredness and beauty. And then the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the tree of duality. Right and wrong, good and bad, in and out, up and down, right and wrong. It's the tree of judgment. It's the tree that creates separation between beings. It's the tree, the knowledge that creates hierarchies and conflict. And so once humanity gets a taste of that, it's hard to go back to that beautiful spiritual state of knowing all things as good, like Genesis 1 says. All things are very good. And when we forget that, when we remember that, we live in paradise. When we forget that, we find ourselves in exile from paradise, which is a type of death. So, the snake. What do you think the snake represents? This was one of your questions. I'm sorry? Awareness. Okay.
Temptation.
Questioning, temptation.
Straight.
I missed that.
Straight.
Satan. No. So in way back ancient Israel, there was no devil. So while the snake has often been turned into a character who is devil-like, or is Satan, or is the devil, it was not the original meaning. Perhaps it was just a literal, they needed someone to tempt Eve in this story, or, interestingly enough, the early goddess religions used the symbol of a snake for their wisdom, for the ability to shed skin and be new. So there's also a very, very likely possibility that the snake was put into this not great role to try and remind the early Israelites that they were not to be tempted away by these goddess religions and not pay attention to their wisdom and not go to their worship and those sorts of things. So, at the end of the day, the question to us becomes, what do we do with this for us today? And for me, in this moment, it makes sense to contemplate what it means to be in a covenantal relationship with God. Covenant's a big word in the Old Testament. It's a word that means a mutual relationship, a reciprocity between two parties, where there's respect and there's compassion and there's care for one another. The Old Testament is filled with the word covenant. And there was a covenant between God and Adam and Eve. The covenant where God said, you get to know paradise and know beauty and know all of this wonderful space as long as you don't eat from that tree. But as soon as you break that covenant, then our relationship is broken and you're exiled. Again, all metaphor, right? And so ancient Israel decided there had to be a way to make people hold to a covenant with God. So they created like 613 laws, because that was going to be easy. 613 laws that they all had to follow, and then you'd be in right relationship with God, and then God would bless you. There's also the 10 Commandments. And unfortunately, our churches picked up the same thing. And they said, well, if we put down a list of things that people have to believe and have to do, and if they do all of these things the right way, then they all get to go to heaven. Then they'll have fulfilled their covenant with God, and all will be right with the world. But I don't think that's what covenant originally meant. I mean, that's not what we do in our covenanted spousal relationships, right? So what would a real covenant with God look like when you're in right relationship with the presence that permeates all things? See, this is why we don't pray. What does it look like? To live in love, right? In unconditional. Robin? Respect, not for one another and for creation. I heard something else. Kindness? Not niceness, where I have to be nice to you, Missy, but a true, deep kindness. Devin?
Like accepting that not just we're fallible, but that others are as well. Like others' mistakes.
You're not the only one that's fallible.
I don't know.
We're all fallible, yes. Everybody has their story, everybody has their brokenness, everybody is a sacred human being. How do we remember that? Clarice?
And not be the judge of other people and trying to tell them
Correct.
what's right and wrong.
Correct. So, not judging. If we live in love, we draw people to a higher plane of consciousness, hopefully. Jerry?
You're less fearful.
Less fearful? Yes, perfect love casts out fear, right? Carol? Justice and mercy. So we live with a sense of justice and mercy. Okay, if you're going to have a good relationship with someone, your spouse, your friend, your kids, how do you do that?
Pay attention.
You pay attention, you keep showing up.
Honesty.
Honesty.
Patience.
Listen.
For better or worse.
Better for worse.
Trust.
Trust.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love. Time and energy. Having a covenantal relationship with the divine is no different than any of all of that. And when we bring all of that into our spiritual practice, I think we live closer to paradise than when we don't. And it's easy to get pulled out of paradise by that darn tree. By the way, what was the fruit on the tree?
Bananas.
It does not name the fruit on the tree. Trick question. Okay, so somebody made it a tree somewhere along the line, or made it an apple. So today, I challenge all of us to ponder what our covenantal relationship with God is, what that connection could look like, how we can put energy into it to help it to become all of these things and bring us a little closer to paradise. And that doesn't mean life's going to be perfect, but it means that we have something that sustains us and grounds us and holds us and carries us when we need it to. Make sense? Amen.